Okay. Last topic for the night. This one's a quick one, but it'll be fun because we got to address it. Arnie brought it up. Lilium is up very nicely, which is one of our Palantir SPACs over the year. And apparently, Arnie found out that we tripled down on our investment in Lilium. So instead of having 400,000 shares, we now have, what is it, 1 million shares? Something, or we have 1.4 million shares. So we have a lot of shares. Arnie, can you give us some context for why we're doing this?
First, I have to say thanks, Emir, for having helped the analytics of this, because with SPACs, I don't really track these numbers. I just noticed that Lilium popped, but why Lilium popped? Because basically, Joby, the competitor, is getting one step closer to the commercialization. They proved basically that their tech works, and Joby is another Lilium that is receiving more attention than Lilium. So it is just a nice hint that at least we saw Palantir doing a good capital allocation in doubling down on
the stock's
company.
$1. They spent $1 million or whatever, right, to get those shares. Yeah. So not bad.
I mean, considering that they're still hugely down on the overall stuff, I would say better to cut losses on things they don't really believe on and to have the concentration in one that at least is showing big signs. Obviously, that doesn't make an impact, but I think it is truly important that at least one of these 20 companies succeeds. My speculations before were for Wejo, Black Sky, and Lilium. Wejo, unfortunately, is out of the game. Black Sky, right now, I don't remember if the shares are still there. I think they sold, but that was the one among the three that I would have bet on.
Matt, any thoughts on Lilium, or it's kind of just a fun little game Palantir is playing with?
No, I mean, that was always the bet, right? I think a lot of people needed to recognize that a lot of this was very speculative pieces. And to me, it was more of an experiment in providing operating systems for experimental technologies that could be truly foundational going forward. And they're doing it for Tritium, which is still an active company and is continuing to make deals as of Q1. They actually made a deal with Undisclosed Oil Company. So if you're curious, maybe you could actually find out who I work for or just listen to Sachin speak because he always talks about it. And then they also have like Black Sky, like you mentioned, they are still publicly traded as well. And they collaborate very extensively with another speculative company that I own, which is Rocket Lab. And Black Skies continue to do great things. And I've always kind of acknowledged that it was a very long-term bet. And I think that that's something that should continue for Palantir, especially with 2.8 billion on hand. They should find companies and continue to work with them. I thought it was a very brilliant deal personally to do the SPACs. I still think that people give them way too much hate for it. I think it's something that they should continue, maybe not necessarily at the pace at which they were doing it. But finding underground companies that are very speculative is the same thing that we're doing here today, right? I mean, a lot of people 2 years ago would have thought that what we're doing with Palantir was the same exact thing. And they could have said, you know, oh, look at you, the stock's down at $5. And now look where we are today. We've tripled the value and are continuing to build and now are GAAP profitable. So it takes vision and long-term thinking to truly make investments like that and to sort through the noise. And yeah, some of them will fail, but you'll be a part of something that's much greater than one of us, you know, alone, if you think in that sort of mindset. And I thought it was very forward thinking of Palantir to do that. And honestly, I'm pretty upset that they stopped investing in small companies like this, because I think it's something that could continue to be a good route for them. One, because that is how their company is built, is focusing on aerial market share across a multitude of different industries and helping people solve big problems. What better way than to be on the forefront of technology and forefront of industry, like they were with Wejo, like they were with Black Sky and Tritium, and as well as Lilium, right? So I think it's something that I hope that they get back to, maybe they haven't been focusing on it as much because of what Wall Street was saying. And unfortunately, they're a publicly owned company to an extent. And they're focusing now on the profitability piece. Now that maybe once they get enough of a runway to get profitability, they could focus a portion of those profits and cash flow back to doing what they were doing. And I anticipate that in the long term, if they continue to have this capital firm, just like Undisclosed Oil Company has, just like Google, just like Amazon, just like Apple has these venture capital firms, in the long term, they will find something that could add a lot of not only value to the underlying book value of Palantir, but also from an operating system perspective, have use cases as well as have an ability to grow revenue for the main business as well. And so that's just my thought. And I maybe you think I'm an idiot for thinking that the SPAC deals were something that was useful, but I still think that that's something that we should continue to use as a company going forward. It might be short-term ROI negative, and a lot of people might be thinking too much like that. And I think that that's probably why they did pause that, coupled with the SPAC craze on its own. But doing it diligently at a controlled pace and setting aside, say, $100 million a year to invest in something, I think will in the long term pay huge dividends.
I'm absolutely aligned. It is not the idea of the SPACs being bad per se. It was the execution. Basically, Palantir went FOMOing into SPACs. It was too much done too fast and at valuations that didn't really make sense. But the picture I was showing is this is Joby, the company that is competing effectively with Lilium, which is getting more visibility, but it is still good for Lilium because the idea of an electric vehicle just taking off, flying vertically is something that is difficult to accept. Probably will take at least 10 years to actually see them in action. But this was a SPAC. So we have a SPAC exceeding the initial
Wait, Joby was a SPAC? I didn't know Joby
Yes.
was a SPAC. Oh, wow.
And why that happened, I checked. Joby's shares surged after receiving US regulatory approval to expand the testing of its air taxi, marking one step toward building a business around electric vehicle-powered vehicles. So there is a regulation approval that also impacted Lilium. So great. Like we have a vision, we have the company helped by Palantir. And what's interesting is that if people start seeing this thing is not only futuristic, but there is already a regulatory environment. There are already having sponsors like Lilium had a partnership with NetJets to actually build jets for them. So when the market starts seeing these hints that is not just a vision like we conquer Mars, but there are actually true hints that there are money that could be made from this opportunity, then the valuations are sustained, they can raise more capital going forward, and they can let the snowball rolling. Especially right now that there is a lot of mistrust in the small companies like SPACs and so on. So
yeah, and Lilium secured a deal in China where they're going to be part of this area that has 85 million people, where they're really developing the jets to have like a regional kind of hub there. And so that's also, I think, what's getting more of the institutional side excited that, look, if it, like speaking qualitatively about this, if electric jets become a thing, going from San Francisco to LA or New Jersey to New York or Shanghai to Beijing in a matter of 20-30 minutes versus 3-4 hours driving, it's like, and it's electric, so there's no carbon gas.
The problem is real.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
There's a lot. Just Houston to Dallas is a very popular flight, and it's an hour. You think about it, if you're able to have a smaller dedicated airport specifically to go from Houston to Dallas, it might speed things up, because think about it, you have to check in, you have to check your luggage, it ends up being a 3-4 hour ordeal to get to Dallas. When if you do something a little bit more efficient, it could be something that's only an hour and much more focused, right? It gets you to a point where you you're not doing something to go from, here to 1,500 miles away. You're kind of an intermediary between the train and what have you. But I think a lot of people don't still talk about a lot of the SPACs as well. Like Rigetti is something that could be huge as well. Quantum computing, I think, is still in its infancy and can do really, really well in the long term. And so, I think that there's more to be said about the potential of continuing to invest in this space. But I've had some people reach out to me about Joby, and I'm also curious if that's something that's eventually going to take off.
Kathy owns that stock.
Would you fly on it?
I probably wouldn't fit, and I'd probably weigh it down pretty extensively. But I don't know. And I was talking about this with Tevis the other day. It's like I've been very convicted. I've consolidated a lot of plays recently, and consolidated and mostly focused on a speculative nature in Palantir and Rocket Lab. And him and I were chatting, and I was just like, you know what? Like, with all these other companies that are truly coming out that are revolutionary, that will move, it's like I do still believe in Rocket Lab. I still do believe in Palantir. But is there something from a graphics perspective or super futuristic that could be something that's a 50x that's right in front of my face, but I'm so focused on Palantir and Rocket Lab? And so I promised him that, one, I'd probably take another look at Tesla, and potentially look at that one, specifically focusing on their long-term different bets, and then also looking at something, not a Joby, but something like a Joby that is very futuristic looking and is pre-revenue, and something that, because where I was basically getting to was like, Rocket Lab and Palantir have now moved into a space where they're less speculative than they once were. They're now actually becoming full-fledged companies. Palantir is profitable, free cash flow positive. Rocket Lab has 10 quarters worth of profitability. They have a sustained cadence going, and they're going to continue to be profitable, or they're going to be profitable within the next year or two. And so you could see those sort of things happening. I need to look now into something that is truly speculative, whether it's a Joby or a Lilium or something like that I can sink my teeth into and have this like big Hail Mary bet. And I need to look, get a third position that is very speculative as these ones become more true long-term holds and stocks, not necessarily speculative positions anymore.
Yeah, and for the people that don't invest in Lilium, as long as Palantir, well, it seems like Palantir will keep their equity. Palantir is exposure to Lilium, right? So you kind of get your exposure to a more spec play with Palantir.
Yeah, and it's a double benefit too, right? Because they own the equity piece, which is going to be mark to market. So if Lilium spikes tomorrow, that'll be a big up to, say, the revenue or the net income kind of coming from the company, coupled with, if Lilium continues to expand, they get the revenue generation just specifically from using Foundry as an operating system, which was part of the deal.
Yep.
And so it's a double whammy in a positive sense to the bottom line.